The heavy oak doors of the courtroom creaked shut, sealing us inside a room that smelled of old paper and indifference. My mother sat next to me, her knuckles white as she gripped the armrest of her wheelchair. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, fragile, like a piece of parchment that a single gust of wind could tear. Every ragged breath she took felt like a ticking clock. Across the aisle, my Uncle Marcus sat behind a mahogany table that cost more than my college tuition. He didn't look like a man about to evict his own brother's sick wife. He looked like a man waiting for a flight to the Hamptons. He straightened his silk tie, leaning over to whisper something to his lead counsel, a shark in a three-piece suit who had spent the last hour painting my mother as a financial liability to the family estate. "Your Honor," the shark began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "My client has been more than patient. For 20 years, he has allowed his sister-in-law to occupy the Clearwater property out of the goodness of his heart. But with the rising costs of maintenance and the sheer scale of the estate, it is no longer feasible to carry this burden." The word burden hung in the air like a physical weight. My mother flinched. Marcus didn't even look at her. To him, she wasn't family, she was a line item on a spreadsheet that needed to be erased. He wanted the house not because he needed the money, he was a millionaire 10 times over, but because he could. He wanted to clear the dead weight from his portfolio. I looked at my father. He was sitting on the other side of my mother, his face a mask of granite. For months, I had watched him age 10 years. I had watched him take calls in the middle of the night, whispering fiercely into the phone, scouring through dusty boxes in the attic until his fingers were stained with ink. Neighbors thought he was losing his mind. Marcus thought he was defeated. "The eviction notice was served 60 days ago," the shark continued, tapping a stack of documents. "The title is clear. The property is registered under Marcus Sterling's primary holding company. We are requesting an immediate execution of the vacate order. My client's sister-in-law has had ample time to find more modest accommodations." Marcus leaned back, a faint, predatory smirk playing on his lips. He caught my eye for a split second and the message was clear. "I win. I always win." He had the money. He had the best lawyers in the state. He had the deed to the only home I had ever known, the home where my father had cared for my mother through 3 rounds of chemo. The judge looked down at us over her spectacles. "Does the defense have anything to present before I make my ruling?" My father stood up. He didn't look like a man about to lose his home. He looked like a man about to perform surgery. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't plead for mercy. He didn't mention my mother's failing health or the cruelty of the situation. "I do, Your Honor," my father said, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. He reached down and picked up a thick, weathered leather folder. He didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at the shark. He opened the folder, pulled out a single, yellowing sheet of paper, and stepped toward the bench. "Before we discuss eviction," my father said calmly, "we need to discuss the 1994 family trust and the specific clause Marcus forgot to mention to his counsel." Marcus's smirk didn't disappear, not yet. But he sat up a little straighter. The shark frowned. The silence that followed my father's statement was thick, the kind of silence that precedes a lightning strike. Marcus leaned forward, his hands flat on the mahogany table. That smug, billionaire confidence was still there, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, narrowed. He looked at the folder in my father's hand like it was a stray dog that had wandered into his pristine office. To understand how we ended up in this wood-paneled room, fighting for my mother's right to breathe in her own bed, you have to understand who Marcus Sterling really is. My uncle didn't build his empire on genius. He built it on the backs of people who trusted him. He was the asset of the family, the golden boy who went to Ivy League schools while my father stayed behind to run the family's modest construction firm and care for our aging grandparents. Marcus saw the world as a game of Monopoly. People were just pieces to be moved, traded, or discarded when they stopped collecting rent. My father, on the other hand, was the liability in Marcus's eyes. A man who valued loyalty over liquid assets. A man who spent his weekends fixing the roof of the family home instead of networking at golf clubs. When my grandfather passed away 20 years ago, the Clearwater property, our home, was left in a complex family trust. At the time, Marcus was facing a liquidity crisis with one of his early tech ventures. My father, being the brother who always put family first, signed over his management rights to the trust so Marcus could use the property as collateral for a short-term loan. "Don't worry, brother," Marcus had said back then, patting my father on the back. "It's just a formality. The house is yours. I just need the bank to see the equity on paper. Once I'm back on my feet, we'll dissolve the trust and the deed goes straight to you and Sarah." My father believed him. Why wouldn't he? They shared the same blood, but as Marcus's wealth grew, so did his greed. He never dissolved the trust. Instead, he folded the Clearwater property into a labyrinth of offshore holding companies and shell corporations. He let us live there, sure. He even played the generous benefactor at Thanksgiving, bragging about how he was letting us stay in the family home for free. Then 6 months ago, my mother's health took a sharp turn. The medical bills started piling up. My father had to scale back his work to be her full-time caregiver. We were vulnerable, and that's when Marcus saw his opening. He didn't need the house. He wanted to sell the land to a developer who was building a luxury high-rise complex next door. The payout was in the millions. To Marcus, my mother's illness wasn't a tragedy, it was a timing issue. She was cluttering up a multi-million-dollar exit strategy. He sent the first eviction notice via a courier on the day my mother came home from her second surgery. No phone call. No "how are you?" Just a cold, legal demand to vacate within 60 days. When my father called him, begging for a human conversation, Marcus's assistant answered, "Mr. Sterling is in a meeting. Any further communication should go through his legal team." That was the moment the liability woke up. For 6 months, while Marcus was busy signing merger agreements and buying yachts, my father was in the basement. He wasn't crying, he was digging. He was calling retired clerks, tracking down the original notary from 1994, and following a paper trail that Marcus had spent 2 decades trying to bury under piles of expensive legal filing. Back in the courtroom, the judge took the yellowing paper from my father's hand. "This is a certified copy of the original 1994 trust agreement," my father said, his voice steady as a rock. "And if you look at Section 4, Paragraph C, the inalienable right of residency clause, you'll find something Marcus's lawyers seem to have overlooked." The air in the courtroom shifted instantly. The judge adjusted her spectacles, peering at the yellowing document with the intensity of a hawk. Marcus's lawyer tried to jump in, his voice cracking slightly. "Your Honor, this is a prehistoric relic. It's irrelevant. The property is currently deeded to Sterling Holdings." "Sit down, counsel," the judge snapped, her eyes never leaving the page. "I'm reading." My father stood there, a pillar of quiet strength. There was no fire in his eyes, no theatrical anger, just the cold, hard weight of a man who had done his homework while his enemy was busy counting imaginary profits. He reached into the folder and pulled out 3 more documents, bank transcripts from 1998, cross-referenced with recent corporate filings. "Your Honor," my father began, his voice cutting through the tension like a razor. "My brother Marcus claims he has carried the financial burden of this estate for 20 years. He painted himself as a saint. But if you look at the ledger from the 1994 family trust, you'll see that every dime of property tax, every insurance premium, and every maintenance fee was paid using funds from my father's original construction dividends, money that belonged to me and my brother equally." Marcus's face, which had been a healthy, wealthy pink, turned a sickly shade of ash. His lawyer started frantically flipping through his own briefcase, but he was looking for answers that didn't exist. They had prepared for a sob story about a sick woman, they hadn't prepared for a forensic audit. My father continued, his tone clinical. "Marcus didn't just transfer the property, he committed a flagrant breach of fiduciary duty. He used the trust's own assets to buy the trust out from under me, all while hiding behind a maze of shell companies. But he made one fatal mistake." My father pointed to the specific clause in the original agreement. This inalienable right of residency wasn't just a suggestion. It was a condition of the 1994 loan Marcus took out to save his first failing tech firm. He signed it, notarized it, and used it as leverage with the bank. If this residency right is violated, the entire transfer to Sterling Holdings becomes null and void. The house doesn't just stay with us, it reverts back to the original trust, which I still co-manage. At that moment, the millionaire snapped. Marcus lunged forward, his expensive suit bunching at the shoulders. That's a lie, that document was superseded, I bought that dirt fair and square. Bang, the judge's gavel echoed like a gunshot. Mr. Sterling, find your seat and your composure, or you'll spend the rest of this hearing in a cell for contempt. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, his breath coming in ragged hitches. The smart trap had snapped shut. That single clause didn't just stop the eviction, it threatened to derail his entire multi-million-dollar deal with the developers. If he didn't clear the title, he was in breach of contract with a billion-dollar construction firm. But my father wasn't done. He pulled the final ace from the folder, a set of tax filings from the last 5 years. He tried to throw my wife out because she's a burden, my father said, finally looking Marcus in the eye. But for the last 60 months, Marcus has been claiming a massive federal tax exemption on this property by listing it as a private medical care facility for a family dependent. He's been using my wife's illness to pocket 6 figures in tax breaks, all while trying to put her on the street. The courtroom went silent. Even the shark lawyer took a step away from Marcus. This wasn't a family feud anymore. This was federal tax fraud. The silence in the courtroom was no longer heavy, it was suffocating. Every person in the gallery, from the bored court reporter to the bailiff at the door, was staring at Marcus. The millionaire who had walked in like a king was now shrinking into his chair, looking like a common thief caught with his hand in the register. The public catharsis was beginning, and it wasn't just happening in this room. My father turned to the judge. Your Honor, because this involves potential federal tax fraud and the illegal use of a family trust, I've already taken the liberty of forwarding these folders to the IRS Oversight Committee and the State Attorney's Office. They received the digital copies exactly 10 minutes ago. Marcus's lawyer turned a shade of white that matched his starched collar. He didn't even try to object. He simply closed his briefcase, stood up, and took 2 steps back, effectively distancing himself from the radioactive wreckage of Marcus Sterling's reputation. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. In my 30 years on the bench, I have seen greed. But to use a family member's life-threatening illness as a tax shelter while simultaneously trying to render them homeless, that is a level of depravity this court will not tolerate. She didn't even wait for a closing argument. She grabbed her pen and signed the order with a flourish that sounded like a blade cutting through silk. The eviction order is hereby vacated with prejudice, she declared. Furthermore, I am freezing all assets associated with the Clearwater property and the Sterling Trust pending a full forensic audit. Mr. Marcus Sterling, you are ordered to surrender your passport to the bailiff immediately. We are done here. Bang, the gavel fell for the final time. It was the sound of a prison door closing, even if the bars weren't visible yet. As we stood up to leave, the courtroom doors pushed open. A local news crew tipped off by my father weeks ago was waiting in the hallway. Marcus tried to cover his face with his briefcase, but it was too late. The man who lived for his public image was about to become the lead story on the evening news. Local tech tycoon accused of defrauding sick relative. I pushed my mother's wheelchair toward the exit. As we passed Marcus, he looked up, his eyes bloodshot and filled with a desperate, pathetic rage. You think you won? He hissed, his voice trembling. I have more money in my offshore accounts than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. I'll buy my way out of this by Monday. My father stopped. He leaned down, his face inches from his brother's. He didn't look angry, he looked pitying. Money only works when people are willing to take it, Marcus, my father said quietly. But the developers you signed with, they have a morality clause in their contract. By noon, they'll have seen the news. They don't do business with tax frauds. Your deal is dead. Your reputation is dead. In this house. It's finally home again. We walked out into the bright afternoon sun. For the first time in months, my mother took a deep, clear breath. She looked up at the sky and smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Marcus had spent his life collecting assets, thinking that liability meant anyone who couldn't make him a dollar. But he forgot the most important lesson of the anatomy of revenge. The most dangerous person in the world isn't the one with the most money. It's the one who has nothing to lose, a folder full of truth, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to open it. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It just sat there bound in a weathered leather folder, waiting to be read.